everybody. Thank you so much for watching. What a great message from Pastor Maya. So thank you for being with us today. And we're going to segue over into something that many of you are interested in. And if you get a watch, I ought to have the whole family here because they're all interested in this as well. So welcome, family, as we talk to Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. Dr. Tenpenny, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Hey, thanks for being here today on Daystar. I have watched many of your videos, and many of our viewers have sent your videos to me, and they have said, Joni, you want to have Dr. Tenpenny on. And one of the people that has mentioned about Dr. Tenpenny is your mother, Jonathan.
Oh, wow.
Catherine Weiss has watched a lot of her videos. But if you would, for our audience today, Daystar goes into every country around the world, in all over America. Would you just give us a brief overview, if you will, of who you are and a little bit about your qualifications to talk about COVID-19?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for being here. It's just a God joy to me to be here. It really is. So my background is in my first career. I say I was in emergency medicine. I was board certified in emergency medicine and the director of a level 2 trauma center for almost 12 years. I moved to Cleveland in 1996 to open my integrative practice. I went to the National Vaccine Information Center meeting in Washington, D.C. in September of 2000. It was a flyer that came in the mail, sat on my kitchen counter for weeks, and it just seemed like I couldn't quite throw it away. So I was single at the time, and I said, well, there must be somebody there I'm supposed to meet. Well, as it turned out, it wasn't somebody, it was something. And I went down and I attended 4 days of that meeting, and I came home and said, how in the world did I miss this? I grew up in a chiropractic family. My grandfather, my father, 3 uncles and 2 cousins were chiropractors. That's the reason I wanted to become an osteopathic physician, was because I wanted to have that in my musculoskeletal medicine in my armamentarium. And after I came back from that meeting, I said, I should probably look into this. Well, I started with the CDC documents, the general recommendation of vaccination, which was the 1998 version. They come out with one of those every couple of years. And after I read it, I said, this can't possibly be it. This can't possibly be what this whole industry is built on. Maybe I ought to read a little more. And so that reading a little more has turned into more than 20 years. Actually, I'm going on 21 years. And well beyond 40,000 hours worth of personal research that I've done investigating problems associated with vaccines. You know, as a physician, we're taught that vaccines are safe, they're effective, they keep you from getting sick, they're harmless, and they're absolutely necessary. And after 20 years of study and more than 40,000 hours of research, I can honestly say that none of those premises are true.
So Dr. Tenpenny, we've done, of course, shows with Robert Kennedy Jr., with Dale Bigtree, and other significant doctors that have talked about some of the information we need to know to be informed about vaccines. I wanted you to specifically address the COVID-19 vaccine and maybe talk a little bit about the mRNA, because a lot of people don't realize that the 2 vaccines that they're using are experimental and that they have the mRNA. Also, I'd like for you to touch on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as well. And again, we're not telling people what they are to do. They have to do what they feel they need to do. And so we're trying to bring information. We're trying to bring truth. My only wish here is to help people, just as I know that's your feeling as well. I'm not paying you, you're not paying me, there's no pharmaceutical backing us. We're simply sharing the truth, especially with our audience, who many are Christians as well as you are.
Yes, well, it's a really important topic because it's on the head of everybody's mind these days. And all 3 of the shots are very important to talk about, and 2 of them are similar and one is very different. So the messenger RNA vaccine, or messenger RNA shot, is the one that's involved with the Pfizer shot and the Moderna shot. And both of them come to the market in about the same time, and they inject a small little piece of genetic material. Now keep in mind that this type of injection has never been done before, ever. This is they've been trying to develop a coronavirus vaccine as far back as 2002, and they were never able to bring it to market because they could not prove safety. When they would inject the coronavirus experimental vaccines into animals, they would get re-exposed with the coronavirus and they would come either deathly sick or die. So the FDA said, you can't move this forward. And the articles talk about the fact the researchers said that we must proceed with great caution to move forward to develop a coronavirus vaccine in humans because of a process called antibody-dependent enhancement, which we can talk about in a minute. But this is an experimental vaccine. When you think about vaccines, most people have had their children vaccinated. They probably were vaccinated as a kid. I mean, up through 1985, there were only 3 different shots. Between 1991 is when they started ramping up the schedule to where now children get multiple doses of 16 or 17 different shots between birth and 18 years of age. They started ramping up the adult vaccination schedule in 2015. And so everybody is very familiar with the term vaccine. And I think that everybody thinks that vaccine are uniform and they're all the same, and that you just inject a little piece of viral material and a little piece of bacteria into the body, you develop an antibody and you're protected. Well, it's much more complex than that. And all of those previous shots injected particles of bacteria or whole intact viruses. So the immune response was completely different. In these 2 vaccines, the Pfizer shot and the Moderna shot, they take a little piece of genetic material that's called messenger RNA, and it's encoded, meaning it's got a recipe written on it for a specific type of protein. So if you can keep that in mind, that with messenger RNA, it's literally a messenger. It takes a message from your cellular DNA out into your cells with a recipe, that it takes the recipe to the manufacturing process, and that manufacturing process is called the ribosomes. Think of the ribosomes as an assembly line. So they take the recipe, they do from your DNA, the messenger RNA goes out into the cell, delivers the recipe to the ribosomes. The ribosomes then process the recipe and make a protein. That happens all day long, 24/7 in our bodies. It's a normal process that happens inside of us. It helps us with repair, like if you've had surgery or an injury or any of those things. It's all of those repair things. Well, what these 2 injections have done is they've taken a piece of a messenger RNA that has a recipe written on it, designed in a lab. And that recipe is to go and make, through the manufacturing process, a protein called the spike protein. Those messenger RNA little particles are extremely unstable. And in order to take them from the laboratory and get them into your body, they have to be wrapped around in a bubble of lipid coating. So they put it in a bubble, like a basketball. They put it in a lipid coating that has several different types of lipids on it that have never been injected into human beings before. So we've never used this lipid interface in any of the previous vaccines. We don't know if all 3 of those, if one of them are toxic. We don't know what happens when all 3 of them are together. There's been nothing called synergistic toxicity testing. They wrap around that messenger RNA with the recipe to keep it stable. And in the Pfizer shot, it has to be stored at like minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 60 degrees centigrade. So it's colder than the North Pole to keep it stable in order to get it from the lab into the solution to then be injected into your arm. So that lipid coating has one of its chemicals on the outside, like a shellac. On the outside of that lipid coating is something called polyethylene glycol. Polyethylene glycol is known to cause big allergic reactions. And in my opinion, I believe that's what's responsible for a lot of people having the allergic reactions and going into anaphylactic shock, which we've had hundreds of cases of that. So when they inject that messenger RNA with the recipe coated in the lipids with the shellac around the outside of it into your body, that lipid protein binds with your cells and opens up, think about it like cracking open like an egg, and depositing that messenger RNA with the recipe inside of your cells. That recipe then is run through the ribosomes. Think of that as the factory to make the protein. That protein is called the spike protein. that protein is supposed to be similar to the spike protein on the surface of the coronavirus that's causing infection. The idea behind this process is that if we create this protein and then we create an antibody to that protein, we can take that antibody and the next time the coronavirus is floating around, we'll glob onto its spike protein and neutralize it. In theory, that's what's supposed to happen. But instead, what happens is once we've gone through that manufacturing and we've created that spike protein, there's a lot of different things that can happen with it. For one thing, it can irrevocably bind to the surface of your cells. The other thing that protein can do is, but through a process called transfection, can go backwards. The protein then can bind to your DNA and irreversibly change it. The third thing that spike protein can do once we've manufactured it is, yes, we can make antibodies to that spike protein. The problem is there's a real issue with the antibodies that are created through this process. Under normal vaccination, like for, say, flu shots or the measles or shingles or the chickenpox, we make a particular type of antibody that's called a neutralizing antibody. When that binds to those recurrent viruses, it gobbles them up, brings in your white blood cells, and disposes of it. We don't even know that happens. It happens all day long in our immune system. But the anti-spike antibodies, I've mapped out about 10 different mechanisms of injury that anti-spike antibody can cause inside of your body once it's been created by that process, that manufacturing process I just described. That anti-spike antibody that's supposed to be there to keep you from getting sick, actually, if you produce it in very high quantities, can have direct adverse effects on your tissues, primarily your lungs, but also to the liver, to the kidney, and to your heart. And there's multiple other mechanisms of how that anti-spike antibody can cause harm. So when people think about, well, they say coronavirus, all that circulating coronaviruses out there that we've known have been around for, since about 2000, for 60 years, they've been able to document coronaviruses. On an annual, normal basis, coronaviruses cause something that looks like the flu. So and we've heard that a lot. We've heard about coronavirus illness and coronavirus, causes kind of like a cold. So if I get this shot, it's just like getting a flu shot, and it'll keep me from getting sick like the flu shot's supposed to do. But the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer shot, the Moderna shot and the Pfizer shot, they act by a completely different mechanism. So this is not just another flu shot. It's not FDA approved because remember, they've tried to been doing this for almost 20 years. They couldn't get it past safety studies and efficacy studies, meaning it keeps people from getting sick. It's completely experimental. They've never done this before. It was put into the market by something called an EUA, which is Emergency Utilization Authorization. So under the stated emergency of the pandemic, the pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, and there are 77 more of these shots, 77 more of these vaccinations under current development. And there's 78 more in animal studies. It's beyond me why we need 150 of these. But it's not been FDA approved. It's totally experimental. It's authorized only under experimental emergency use. We have zero long-term studies on what's going to happen down the road with this anti-spike antibody, what can happen with autoimmune diseases, with neurological conditions, with cardiovascular type of conditions. In fact, humanity right now as we speak, we are the experiment. They will find out long-term what's happened to us, and we're their study.
Wow. Dr. Sherri, thank you so much for sharing all of that information. I'm curious, can you tell us about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and how that one is different as well?
It's very different because it bypasses that manufacturing process and the recipe, the manufacturing and the creating of the protein. What they've actually done with the J&J shot is they've actually taken an adenovirus, a typical adenovirus that causes the cold, and they've shelled it out. They've taken the genetic material of that adenovirus out from the inside, and they've taken an already been made spike protein and put it inside of the adenovirus shell. In order to grow that and replicate it, to make it grow, they are using at least one and maybe two different types of tissue cells that come from aborted fetal tissue. One is called PCR.C6, which comes from retinal tissues of previously aborted fetal tissues. And there's another one called HEK that comes from a kidney of a previously aborted fetus. They have to have viruses in order to get a large enough quantity to manufacture a shot or a vaccine. They have to replicate in living tissues. That's why those tissues are used. So you've got this shell of an adenovirus and you've got the protein inside of it. They inject that into your system. The shell of the adenovirus binds to your cells and again, opens up like an egg and deposits that protein into your system, and the process begins to create the anti-spike antibodies. That's a foreign protein that's just been deposited into your body. It activates many of your toll-like receptors, which I think are God inside of us. The toll-like receptors separate self from non-self, and toll-like receptors are able to tell what's a foreign protein versus your natural in your body protein. There's a huge amount of immunology that happens there. You get a lot of cytokines, which can cause inflammation. You activate the white blood cells, the neutrophils in the bloodstream, and the macrophages in your tissue. There's all this activity that happens, an acute flare-up to create this anti-spike antibody. Now, the anti-spike antibody is going to be the same or very, very similar in all three of those vaccines because that's the end result, is to make the anti-spike antibody.
Okay, so I know that the CDC, and they have actually given these numbers that as of a few days ago, there were 996 deaths from the COVID-19.
Actually, I got some, it's actually more than that.
Okay.
That was from about 4 weeks ago. The updated date that came from February the 28th, in 1 week, we went from 1,097 reported deaths to 1,278 reported deaths. In 1 week, we went from just under 19,000 reported adverse events to over 25,000 reported events. That's the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is a voluntary reporting system, and it's well known that that database captures about 10% of adverse events. So we could be looking at right now as many as 12,000 deaths. And can you think of one single product? Can you think of any product in any industry, across the board, any industry, that if somewhere between 1,200 and 12,000 people had been killed using it in the first 10 weeks of use, that it would still be on the market? And not only still on the market, but heavy-handedly pushed to get people to use it or to take it. It's just an enigma to me.
And the real question is, like you mentioned, 6 months from now, a year from now, that's when we're really going to see what these vaccines have done to people. And you expect what, autoimmune disorders, heart, kidney, lung issues. Do you see that happening?
All of them. There was a study that came out the middle of January by a very well-respected, highly respected immunology group in California. And what they did was they said, when we create this anti-spike antibody, does it just go after the virus, the one that you might be re-exposed to, or maybe one of the coronaviruses? Or can it cross-react with your body, which is what autoimmune disease is? So they took tissue samples and they put them in what they call little wells. They're like little wells. They look like little Dixie cup wells. And they put samples of 55 different tissue types in these little wells. Then they dropped serum that had the anti-spike antibody on it and saw what the reaction was. And what they found was that the antibody cross-reacted with 28 different tissue types. One of the highest concentrations, one of the highest aggregations of where the antibody attached to was the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the inner lining of the mitochondria, to be exact. The mitochondria are little organelles inside of every muscle system in your body that they produce your chemistry, they produce your gasoline, and your body's gasoline is called ATP. So ATP is the gasoline that runs your body, and it's produced internally by the mitochondria. The antibody attack the mitochondria and make it not work correctly. And I believe, it's my opinion, that that's one of the reasons why one of the most profound side effects from after people have experienced that, after they've received one of these 3 approved shots, is profound fatigue. It's because you've just taken a handful of salt and you've thrown it in the engine of your car and you expect it to produce energy. It can't produce energy. In fact, the most common side effects that we see, even after the injection, are headaches and profound fatigue. And they know that this protein, and they believe the antibodies also can cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain and attack at least 3, if not 4 different types of tissue types that were discovered by this group out of California who did the research.
Also, one of the things that we just found out about is for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they're actually testing it on infants and pregnant women. How is it possible, or how is it legal to test it on a newborn when they can't give consent?
Well, that's a really, really good question. It would make you want to know how they approved any of the vaccines that are given to children under 6 months of age because they can't give informed consent. When I started hearing that J&J wanted to now start testing this on newborns, I thought, why? The children under the age of 12 rarely, if ever, contract this infection. All of the death rate amongst children under the age of 12 is as close to 0 as it can possibly get. All of this nonsense that we have done, the destructive, psychological, emotional nonsense that we've done to children by masking them, separating them, keeping them from home, not allowing them to do any of the things that normal kids in grade school are supposed to do, growing these children up to not understand the subtleties of facial expression, to make them be fearful of people who don't have a mask, to make them to be, when they should be fearful of people who do have a mask, who might kidnap them. I mean, and now when they want to start trying to experiment with a completely experimental type of shot, never before done on human beings in general, now they want to do this on newborns. It's a crime against humanity. It's an absolute assault on children of God.
Wow. We only have a few minutes left. Susie, quickly, your question.
My question was, I know several people in my neighborhood and stuff who've got the vaccine and have talked about those same side effects that you mentioned. And so, it's natural to just worry about them. What advice would you give to people who've got these vaccines and are now getting this information and they're scared? What would you say to them?
Well, it's a disturbing answer that you don't want to hear. With the types of things that this injection does, binding the spike protein to the surface of your cells, making an antibody, which means you're sensitized to that forever, through a process called transfection, binding spike protein to your cells. Once you've been vaccinated, it is the mark. You cannot become unvaccinated. A lot of the other vaccines, people want to know what they can do to detox from the mercury or the aluminum or the viruses. This is an irreversible thing. Once you have decided and made it an uninformed decision, I can't tell you how many people say, I don't even want to hear about it, just give me the shot. I want to be back convenienced. I want to be convenienced in my life. So you're exchanging a lifetime of probable illness, possibly even death, so you can be convenienced and get on an airplane and go to the store? People really need to know about this. I've done over 400 interviews in the last year about this. I haven't been quiet about it, and neither have a lot of other people. People really need to put their lives in God's hands and not in the hands of a pharmaceutical.
Well, Dr. Tenpenny, I know you're coming to Daystar in May. We look so forward to having you, but I felt like it was so important to have you today to share this information. You have shared it with the world today. I applaud you for that. I know that you're being censored. I know that we've been censored. I know all of the different doctors I've had on have been censored, but we will continue to speak the truth in love. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for being here today, and we hopefully will see you in a few weeks.